Myers, and I am the Chief Data Analytics Officer for the United States Army's Aviation and Missile Command. And I am a former military retired Army soldier. And so a lot of you might think, well, what does that have to do with data? And how does this tie together? And how is this relevant to me? So the Army is a profession. It's a trusted vocation, much like that of an educator, where we bring soldiers and civilians together with their collective experience. And while we are protecting the nation, you're growing our children. And so I think from my background and your background, there's an awful lot of parallels where our professions are very important, and what we do is often behind the scenes, but is exceptionally valuable. And throughout my career, I spent 20 years in the Army, and I've spent almost 15 years supporting the Army as a contractor and a civilian. Most of my career has been in logistics. And as you can imagine, logistics generates an enormous amount of data. If you've ever logged onto Amazon or any online shopping and you've shopped for something, those are catalogs in the background. Those are sets of data that say, I have this part number or item number assigned to this item, and here are all the attributes to it, and this is how many times it's been ordered. So that, having done logistics for the Army, I got really intrigued by data and how it all ties together that answer the questions. And so not only was it my profession as a soldier, I've continued to support because just the feeling of being something so much larger than myself and yet so in the weeds with the data is just really powerful and intriguing to me. But it's not that way for everybody, right? Not everybody feels the same thing, right? Data often drives change because we take that data, it derives information, and then we make decisions on it. It allows us to look at our processes and say, you know what, and you guys might actually relate to this, right? People look at data and they say, oh, our test scores aren't high enough. Maybe we have to teach our delivery. And I understand that there's oftentimes decisions made using data that doesn't have the personal touch in it. Sometimes data can be used to make really good decisions. Sometimes data is used in and of itself in a vacuum, and the decisions don't actually have the human touch to them to make it right. So how does that tie into our workplace, right? So oftentimes people say data-driven decisions are bad and because they're going to make us change something. And so there becomes this workplace culture of we don't really want change. But it really comes down to, do we have a common purpose? Do we have a common understanding? Because if we use data to bring ourselves to a common purpose, a common understanding based on our shared experiences, much like as a profession, how do our leaders use data? Is their behavior driven differently than our behavior? How do our organizations or our employees? So in the case of, if you're an administrator, your employees might be the educators, but if you're the educator, then your employees or your customers are your students, right? What are their views of it, how you do it? And are those expectations aligned? So how do we do that? How do we drive a workplace culture that's intangible, right? It's not something you can necessarily measure definitively. So how do we do that? How do we drive our workplace culture to become more data sensitive, to embrace data in our day-to-day business? How do we encourage our children, regardless of their age, kindergarten or college students, or lifelong learners, how do we encourage them to embrace data? So interestingly enough, my grandson is here with me. He was helping me get set up, and I was showing him that on the agenda is Minecraft and TikTok and Netflix and Pokemon, and he was just blown away that all of those have data in the background. So now, I'm not as nerdy as I was earlier today. So there's this slide is one of my actual favorites because this relates to any project we want to do, but we use it in my organization. We've recently stood up a data and analytics governance program, and we are building a data literate culture across our command. But this really goes to anything. If you can take this from a data perspective or a classroom perspective, or even just a project that you have at home, then this can help these things can help with this, right? So first you have to envision, right? If you're a boss, a high-level management, or even if you're just in a classroom, envisioning where you want to go, encouraging the people that are on it with you, engaging with them, educating them, empowering them. And then there's a sixth E, which would be evaluate. So how do you know if you're successful if you don't evaluate? We've left it off on purpose because evaluation I absolutely believe needs to be there. How do you know you did it right? But not every single thing is going to come back to an evaluation. So you have to, the leadership has to understand. We can't go forth, whether it be at one of our big organizations, the leadership has to have that vision. They have to see the path ahead. They have to understand. They have to buy and support, right? We're going to use data to do this. Well, we don't think data is important. Well, you're never going to get anywhere. Is there a strategy with that? If you're in a classroom and you want to use your grades to identify how you can write your curriculum, if it's not bought in and is supported by your leadership and they are coming at it from a different angle, we know that that's going to cause some friction. But maybe together what we can do is help bring that vision based on what it is. And if we look at data as an asset, as something to help us do our jobs, and we remove those silos where you've got this data here and this data here and this data here, and we put that data together, we remove those silos when we're thinking about the long-term picture, then it can help us move forward, not only tying the data together. So we want to encourage, right? And as we encourage those around us, our leadership, it's coming back to that common understanding. How does this tie back to our organizational values? Is that at our school? Is that in our school district? Is that in our region? Does that come up to the national? How does that tie back to the values? Are the values in our classroom? Is that something we can control? As we're parents and we're teaching our children, if they're on the gaming PlayStation or Sony or whatever the gaming platform is that they have, that all has data behind it. If we can explain to them how that ties together, maybe the value we're putting on it is more than just entertainment, more than just that instant fix of fun, but tying it back to the data science that makes those things happen, and maybe getting them engaged from a coding or a data scientist perspective, and not just from the wow, this is a lot of fun dopamine drip that it creates, instant gratification, but maybe more of a long-term learning from it. And everybody should play a part. Who is going to be supportive in our roles as a family, as an educator, as an administrator? Who are our champions? Who believes in it? Who's understanding in it? And who can help us bring that understanding of data from kindergarten all the way up in our homes? Who are those people who can help us understand that? And we want to engage with those people, right? So in a classroom, we're going to engage with all of our students. And maybe we have students, when I was setting this up, the gentleman who is facilitating was helping me get on screen and get my slides showing. And again, my grandson is here and he says, Grandma, the share button is there. So our children are so savvy already technology-wise that maybe we can help them help others. Maybe there's a teacher or a parent that you know that's really savvy with data and how it ties together, and they can help. I'm sure we've all had that person who's helped us figure out how to find something online, and we know that all comes back. If you're in an organization and you can envision how you can use the data at your fingertips to make something better, who's your resistor? Who are those friction points? Find out why they're being resistant. Maybe something's failed in the past. Maybe some decision was placed on them, and so now they're a little bit discouraged with the use of data. Sometimes people say it's been weaponized against us, right? We're looking at stats, but we're not looking at any of the intangibles, that culture that goes with it. So share and engage with them. Find out where those friction points are. Listen to them to try and bring that. And then data excitement. I mean, at work they tease me because I get very excited about this. I think it's so powerful at all levels, little children all the way up. And we're never too old to learn. We're never too old to understand how the data ties together in every aspect of our lives. it's boiling down to data. And from a government perspective, I work for the Department of the Army, we have created an Army data strategy because we know that that's what's going to allow us to be successful in protecting our freedoms and going forth with the mission that we've been entrusted with, is taking that data and turning it into information where our leaders can make informed decisions at the right time, so that the right data is available to them in the right format so they can make the right decisions. And that's really something that we're working toward. And of course, education. I can't speak highly enough about education. And so I've thrown some of them out here. Obviously, it's way more than this. The list could be multiple slides just in and of itself. But, right, how do you educate? Well, for us, we're doing a skills assessment. Just because we say data doesn't mean everybody knows what that means. Is an analysis different than analytics, right? Is integration different than joins? What are the words? We're building a data literacy program. And so again, I'm going to go back to that. What is that common understanding? So in my organization, which has about 7,000 people located geographically dispersed in many locations, how do I make sure that the people that are located in Texas have the same understanding of a phrase or a terminology or an action as the folks in Pennsylvania? Right. So we want to work to build that understanding across our organization. And likewise in schools and at homes, if you're saying something to do with data, you say data science or you say data analytics. If you are not on the same sheet, you may be talking across and then not get the results that you're looking for when you're talking to your children, who may or may not know more, whether they be your own personal family children or whether they're your children in your classroom. They may know more about some of this stuff than we do, depending on the levels that we teach and engage at. So it's important to start creating that common understanding. And we can start that at the earliest levels of our education from the very beginning. If we start using data literacy terms in kindergarten and up, by the time our children grow, we have positioned them for what is coming and coming very quickly in a data-related world. And we allow them to have some of that language as part of their day-to-day lives, but also giving them some of the tools necessary to be successful as they move forward. You can see there's a lot of stuff, the different types of data. Where do you get your data from? I mean, when we log on to Amazon and we want to go shop for something, and it says Amazon recommended for you, well, it's because every time you've gone on, you've looked for, in my example, I have a new screen room and I'm looking for an outdoor rug. So they've used that data from my profile, and when I log in now, it recommends outdoor rugs for me. And that data is being used to drive our customer experience. When kids log on to Netflix or on their product, on their tools or whatever, it keeps that, and that data is used to help drive the customer experience, that interactive experience. And so that's important for us to understand that. And then there's obviously, as you can see, visualization. When the doctor's office brings up a report and it's got charts and graphs on it, that's taking that data that's in the back and putting it in an easily consumable visualization. And so it's really kind of an interesting dynamic how broad this is, but how our children can become, maybe they're very artsy and crafty. Maybe we can help guide them to creating visualization, which is now PowerPoint, but we can actually, use a computer to visualize that stuff. So there's a lot of different opportunities for us to help grow our children, like I said, again, not only at school, but in our homes and in our families. Then we want to empower them. So this is a quote. It's taken from Accenture. We found that employees who identify as data literate were at least 50% more likely to say they feel empowered and trusted to make better decisions. So while this doesn't necessarily relate today to students, they're eventually going to be an employee somewhere. So if they understand data, if they understand where the data come from, how it ties together, where those answers came from, who decided that was the right answer, then they're more likely, as they engage in the world into data related activities, to have a trust and maybe even more of an interest to kind of figure out how it is that we get that data and we get those answers. So that kind of sums up the 5 E's that I have. But again, that last one that I don't have a slide for, but I talk about is evaluation. So if I have data, for example, and I'm going to go back to the education community, is if we have a group of students and you have evaluated them and they've gotten their test scores, then you're using data to evaluate the students. But then perhaps the administrators are using the data from each of the classrooms to evaluate a grade level. Or perhaps higher than that is looking across all the grade levels to evaluate a school. So it's important for us, not only as it impacts the children that we're teaching, but also how it impacts going up, right? So what are those data points and what is the importance? And if we have a metric and we know that we're trying to get this, and I know that in many instances, this is a sensitive subject. As a parent, it was sensitive for me when, when teachers would talk about, your kid didn't make this grade or whatever. Well, I understand we have to have a metric against we get measured. And did we succeed or fail at this? This is where it comes back to that intangible, that culture, that envisioning. How do we take that evaluation, identify, are we using the right metric? And what decision do we want to make from this data? Maybe we're looking at it completely wrong. Maybe that's not the metric we want to use. So it's important to understand what is it we're truly evaluating, what data set are we using, and are we trying to answer the right question? Going back to what we do for my organization, are we getting the leadership the right information to answer the right questions so they can make the right decision? And so it becomes so powerful as teachers in our day-to-day interactions with the young children whose lives we're influencing every day. How do we expose them to data? How do we show them that everything they do in their lives comes back to the data? They don't necessarily have to be data scientists or understand calculus, although that's really cool. And we can bring that into it depending on the level we're at, but even from the earliest of ages. So I appreciate your time. We have a little bit of time. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. All right, I'm not seeing anything in the chat at this time. Well, the slides will be available and this presentation will be recorded, so it will be available later. I'm on LinkedIn if anyone thinks of any questions afterwards. I really appreciate you taking the time and dialing in. It's been wonderful and I appreciate everything. Thank you so much.